You should be able to talk about whatever you want to talk about and have an exchange of ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're paying people not to work. Now, is it just me? Or is the system turned on its head? We now have to look at people that have said, well, since we can't say that, we'll tell you what you can say.
Dr. Phil has been recently handing out red pills like candy on his daytime TV crowd. It's almost like he's become the opposite of The View, but unlike those grumpy hosts, he manages to make his points with humor with a light touch. Yeah, Dr. Phil is back in the spotlight, but this time it's not for his typical TV advice or celebrity gossip. Oh no, this time he's taken on something much bigger, the wild world of woke culture in Hollywood.
I'm particularly concerned about this woke agenda that's being pushed.
Agreed.
And let's be honest, things are getting pretty crazy. If you thought Dr. Phil was just your average daytime therapist, think again. He's thrown himself right into the middle of one of the biggest culture wars out there. And the backlash? Oh, it's already heating up. We've heard of cancel culture. You slip up, say something controversial, and boom, you're canceled. And who feels it the most? Celebrities, influencers, and anyone big on a platform. But here's the kicker. Dr. Phil isn't backing down at all. He's standing taller than ever, calling out what he sees as the ridiculousness of woke Hollywood. So what did he say that stirred up all this drama? Well, get ready, because we're diving into one of the most buzzworthy moments of his career. Well, Dr. Phil is sitting across from a group of parents on a show, and they're talking about gender pronouns in school. This is exactly the kind of topic that can turn a chill chat into a full-on argument in seconds. The parents were airing their worries about teaching young kids these deep and tricky ideas about gender.
They should be able to explore and express themselves.
And you say that this is appropriate beginning in kindergarten.
I mean, seriously, kindergarten? These parents were thinking, hey, maybe, just maybe, 5-year-olds should stick to learning their ABCs before jumping into the big, deep waters of gender identity. Dr. Phil, being Dr. Phil, let them share their thoughts, but you could tell that he was itching to jump in. And when he did, he didn't hold back. He straight up questioned the whole idea of teaching kids about pronouns and gender fluidity at such a young age. He turned to a teacher on the panel and asked flat out that they say 12 is the right age to start teaching kids about gender. Why not wait until they've got the basics of biology down first?
You say that 12 is the age that you should be talking to children about gender.
And let me tell you, the crowd was divided. Some were clapping, while others were gasping. That's when you know things are about to get real intense. One teacher, Mr. Smith, came in with a whole lot of science, and let's be honest, a whole lot of guts too. During the conversation, one woman made the point that our organs are just physical parts of us, but gender is what we're identified by. She was basically saying that the gender we identify with isn't the same as the body we're born with. Naturally, Dr. Phil wasn't having it. He shot back. You're giving conclusions, not arguments. You can't just make something up and expect everyone to take it as fact. Well, I don't buy that distinction. You need to argue for it.
Well, I don't accept that distinction. You have to argue for it. You're just giving a conclusion. You're just making it up.
That's classic Dr. Phil. He's not there to win everyone over. He's there to speak his mind. And this isn't the first time Dr. Phil has gone toe-to-toe with the so-called woke brigade. In another episode, he took on cancel culture head-on, and boy did he let loose.
But unless you're speaking from a place of love, I think you should just keep it to yourself.
And if you disagree, I mean, you can say so, but you can do it respectfully, right?
Right.
Not a single word was withheld from him. In his presentation, he presented a statistic that was quite astounding. 62% of people in the US are afraid to express their genuine opinions because they're afraid of being fired. Yeah, more than half of the population of the United States is walking on eggshells because they're terrified that uttering a single word that is not appropriate could result in the loss of their jobs, their reputation, or even worse. Dr. Phil is of the opinion that simply disagreeing with woke ideas is sufficient to earn you the label of a hater or a misogynist, and it may even result in the loss of your job or your presence on social media. This is the very definition of ignoring the right to free speech and taking away the rights of others while pretending to stand up for your own rights, according to your perspective. Phil is of the opinion that this is not only hypocritical, but that is also full of unfair double standards. Phil now has a message for all the people in the United States.
And get back to the core values that they really hold near and dear and not give too much attention to the loudest voice.
The loud voices he's talking about? Yeah, it's the woke crowd. He believes they're actually a minority group themselves, but they get loud and disrespectful just to grab attention. So why shouldn't people give them attention? Well, according to Dr. Phil, the answer is pretty simple.
Loudest voice oftentimes is the shrill, fringe voices that are trying to rewrite.
Just because you want things to be a certain way doesn't mean they magically change, especially when what you're trying to shift goes against most people's experiences and preferences. Phil is urging everyone to get back to good old common sense and logic. He insists that he's not picking a political side, he's just focused on what's real. It seems like a reality, especially when it comes to gender, and has not only gotten more complicated, but also more controlling. But don't take my word for it. In a nutshell, this really highlights one of the biggest issues with woke culture. People have always had disagreements throughout history, but there's something different now in the woke crowd that just doesn't disagree. They demand everyone else fall in line with their views. And according to Dr. Phil, to defend beliefs that aren't based on science or facts, they make up new words and practices. One example, the use of trigger warnings on college campuses.
A couple of universities are using trigger warnings for Romeo and Juliet, where they say, trigger warning, suicide content.
Phil thinks that this is dangerous because it is where the coddling of feelings and emotions in younger generations begins. He is especially shocked that even school plays on these campuses are coming with trigger warnings. But what Phil says next is where things get really interesting.
Overwhelming body of literature says trigger warnings not only don't work,
Make you weaker.
they actually make you anxious.
Trigger warnings were created to prevent problems, so why are universities still pushing them even though studies show they don't actually work? Dr. Phil has a pretty bold take on that. Phil says if he can easily look up the research and see the trigger warnings aren't effective, then surely every university using them can do the same. So why are they still doing it? According to Phil, it's all about virtue signaling. They want to look like they're woke, sensitive, and protective, even if it's not really helping anyone. So, yeah, Dr. Phil made a strong case that trigger warnings actually end up causing more anxiety. They give off the message that students' comfort should always come first. The problem? When these students graduate and step into the real world, they'll quickly realize that life isn't always going to be comfortable. That's why Phil is so worried about this trend. Phil also thinks that beyond just virtue signaling, woke people seem more focused on controlling the narrative than having real honest conversations. Instead of encouraging open dialogue, woke culture tends to shut things down, pushing everyone to conform rather than think for themselves. And that's what really bothers Phil. It prioritizes ideology over education and leaves no space for different perspectives. On top of the virtue signaling, Phil believes many of these woke folks don't even fully understand the issues they're speaking out on. They see someone attacking a person or ideal, and they think, hey, this looks like fun, let's pile on. Without really knowing what they're talking about, they jump on the bandwagon, and that's what Phil finds truly concerning. It's like everyone's tiptoeing through a minefield, never knowing when they'll step on the wrong opinion or word. And Dr. Phil, he's not having any of it. He believes this culture of fear is tearing society apart, making people too scared to have real honest conversations. How are we supposed to fix problems, he argues, if we're too afraid to speak up? And the crowd, they loved it. Applause broke out and you could see it in their faces. This really hit home. It's not just about Dr. Phil speaking his mind. It's about all of us having the freedom to speak our minds without the fear that one word will ruin our lives. But wait, there's more. Dr. Phil has not only taken on cancel culture, he's bashed Hollywood's obsession with being woke. So what do you think? Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below.